isn't it? It put me straight on the hold, even though I could see you. And so anyway, got back in eventually.
Oh, great. Yeah, yes, I was a little bit worried, obviously, but obviously in good shape. Um,
Cool.
did you get the presentation?
I did, yes.
Okay, good. So I wasn't sure exactly what we should be covering today. I can take you through it. Obviously, you know the story pretty well. Um,
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think obviously we spoke. When was that? Not that long ago. Obviously, more of a, for kind of a council call conversation, obviously off the record about the forthcoming release and some of the positioning, etc. So I just wanted to, make sure we had a formal. We can probably get to it pretty quickly, I guess, but an
yeah,
actual official conversation about the release, and so we can actually then write the report based on this conversation and keep the
great.
previous conversation separate.
Yeah. All right. Good. So why don't I just sort of take you through it, and we can go as fast or as slow as we need to.
Sure.
Um, so assuming you have it there, I mean, I think that the first thing is that you'll see that we've really identified that this kind of I suppose the kind of focus around distributed database is the
Uh-huh.
thing that gets people to understand what we're talking about best. And and so you'll see that in the setup here, we're talking about distributed databases with these various characteristics, and then we sort of take people through that. And so the slide 3 is actually the kind of critical slide in that sense, where what we're saying is that distributed databases have, for a long time, if you go back in the literature for decades, really, have promised this idea of being able to add capacity on demand and being resilient to failure and so on. The problem has been that it's been hard for people to build those, and that you've had these kind of 3 traditional approaches to it, um, which are fairly self-explanatory for people that are close to it. Shared disk being the kind of Oracle rack style of thing, which is not really a distributed database, but it is a database in which you're running running it on multiple machines, and it's got limitations on scaling and cost and some other complexities. But there are some new age guys like Scalability and whatever that are trying to do the same kind of thing. And then you get this shared nothing approach, which is or sharded or partitioned approach, where you basically divide the database into multiple databases, and you know a lot about that. So you may or may not have a middleware layer over it trying to hide the fact that it's been partitioned. You may just force the application to take care of that. But in effect, what you're saying is databases are tied to a single machine. What I'm going to do is just have lots of them and just manage the entire data set that way. And that's actually works for within the constraints. And so it's not for nothing that folks like Facebook are running these kinds of systems with huge levels of sharding. But it's certainly not a single logical database, and it's not a general purpose solution. And then you get to the kind of F1 stuff, where in effect, and this title isn't quite right, where it says synchronous replication. The phrase I use is synchronous commit, and it's this idea that it's distributed. What we're going to do is we're going to commit the data in multiple places before we return to the application, and that clearly works, but it's a sort of a brute force approach, and you need to have very fast networking, which Google does have, and you have to have atomic clocks and things to synchronize the machines. And they've been successful running AdWords on it, and they're moving many more things to it. So that's a good solution, but it's kind of brute force, requires you to really own high-end hardware to pull it off. And then it's just really sort of what we're talking about, which internally we talk about as more as a kind of a distributed cache kind of an architecture than a traditional storage-oriented architecture. And this is the Jim Starkey invention, and so it's really something which, again, without going into the technical details of how it works, but it is this distributed in-memory database with sort of a replicated backing stores, and it's a genuine distributed database. And so it gives you actually all of those things that has been promised by distributed databases for a long time. And that's really the sort of the setup for, how do we get to this capacity on demand and elastic scale out? How do we get to the resilience of the system to failure? How do we get to geo-distributed operation? It's all really because we've solved the problem of distributed databases. And that's sort of where we're coming from. It's kind of interesting, I suppose, from your perspective. You may or may not agree with this, but really we're not seeing anyone else that's kind of really solved it at this level. That even the folks that are talking about geo-distributed operation, are really doing some kind of partitioning, replication, kind of things which are in one of the previous columns, but haven't really solved this fundamental problem. That's sort of where we're coming from, and that's where the whole of version 2 has been positioned around that sort of concept.
Sure.
Just and then the next,
just specifically, just around, I understand obviously the flows you said there. It's just interesting that you're talking about it as using the term cache, which I think when you start talking about cache, there's quickly get to assumptions there. Actually, it's not. We're not talking about a database. You're talking about that, data caching, which clearly isn't the case. So I just wonder your perspective on using that as kind of as the descriptor.
Yeah, we're not super settled on this descriptor, but I'll tell you the thing that we're finding hard to get through to people is this idea of on-demand loading of the data. The presumption for people is that that we must have some way that you're specifying partitioning or something, that where does the data live and how do I tell it where to live and how do I map that onto my workloads, and so somehow conveying to people that it's really about demand loading the data into these various machines, and there really isn't any configuration. It's just whatever data the application is asking for gets loaded into that local machine, and the magic is not about how we're partitioning it. The magic is about how we're doing the concurrency between those kind of replicas, as in memory replicas. But I take your point that if you say cache, it tends to kind of tends to kind of position it as sort of something, I don't know, more like a memcached or something. And,
exactly.
And so we're not totally settled on that, but we haven't been able to find a good phrase that captures it.
Sure. Okay.
The next slide just sort of talks about kind of what we've been doing, and so we're in the we've been shipping since January, as you know very well, and we've had I don't know, over 10,000 folks evaluating the product, downloading it, doing stuff with it, of which hundreds have deployed kind of freemium apps, because at the low end the system's free forever, and so there's a lot of people that are building things. It's kind of interesting that we're getting folks that call us and say, hey, I've built, just a couple of weeks ago I had someone call in and say, I've built the next generation internet games infrastructure, and I've built a game, and I'm about to deploy it, and I think I'm going to take over the world, and I want to, I want to find out how much I owe you. And so it's kind of interesting that these apps are now starting to, just sort of bubble up as, as kind of commercial licenses for us. We had the same thing with actually a major aircraft manufacturer that called us and said, we built a maintenance app, and we're wanting to deploy it across multiple data centers. How much do we owe you? So this model is actually working really well, and we're ahead on our customer acquisition. We sort of this year we didn't set ourselves gigantic targets for revenues, but we did set ourselves goals for customer acquisition, and we're order a month ahead of schedule in terms of bringing customers on. Now, I mean, it's still not huge numbers, but if you think about it's order 2-3 dozen kind of range. It's that kind of range. but still, that's for a first year of operation.
Yeah.
We're feeling very good about that.
Yeah, particularly in the in the database space, you're talking about significant deployments, then yeah, I mean that kind of is what I would have been expecting. So yeah.
Right. And we're kind of just to mention that we are getting a lot of recognition from from folks like yourself, and I think that that's really helping. That people are kind of realizing that this is of all the various things that are out there. This really is a innovative next generation kind of a thing, and so we're not at the point yet where people are sort of saying, well, we're kind of the leader in the database market, but I think that relative to these kind of next generation SQL vendors, I think that we are being seen as the visible people, the innovators, the drivers, the thought leaders, etc. So feeling good about that. Around the kind of partners, and we haven't really talked too much about this, but we have CEO level visibility in both HP and IBM. These guys are at a very strategic level. They have obviously huge issues with Oracle at every level, and they don't really have an answer. It's my understanding that this is the first year that IBM will be behind Microsoft in terms of database market share, and so you've gone from IBM being #1 database vendor a few decades back to now they're #3. DB2 really isn't gaining market share at this point, and so they've got all sorts of questions around that, including what do they do as they start now ramping up this whole huge investment in cloud initiatives. And HP similarly, HP's challenge strategically is that they're increasingly becoming a sort of a vendor of commodity hardware and printer ink, and how do they really sort of energize the next generation of HP? It has to be around software, in particular, kind of infrastructure software. They've got a lot of activity going around Vertica, and that's going very well, by the way. So both of those guys are really very engaged on whether or not this is this is the sort of compelling alternative to the traditional database vendors.
Sure.
Amazon's interesting. They've actually they're quite hard to partner with, to really partner with, and but they've actually been bringing us customers, and in one case actually paid us to make the customer successful, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But so you can sort of see what's happening is that one of the nice things about this product is it's very strategic because at least functionally, it's a legitimate alternative to a general purpose SQL database, which is not something you can easily say about really anything else in the market.
Sure.
So that's kind of yeah.
Yeah, no, just in relation, because I've seen that you're obviously part of a couple of the HP partner programs. In relation to IBM, what does that interest that there is there translate to in terms of actual partnership programs at this point?
Well, the IBM, and obviously this is confidential, this part of it, but the IBM conversations are all around their next generation cloud initiatives. If you think about what's happening in IBM, they came out with their IBM Smart Cloud, which actually was like 3 or 4 different clouds, and it was one of these where IBM realized they weren't getting it, right? That they've kind of built infrastructure, but it wasn't really competitive, it wasn't really compelling, it wasn't really going very far, and so they bought these guys SoftLayer, who have, I don't know, 14 data centers around the world and whatever, and they're a legitimate cloud player, and they've got actually some very interesting technology. So IBM bought that, and really, I don't think they've officially stated this, but in effect what they're doing is they're shutting down their old IBM Smart Cloud stuff and moving everything onto SoftLayer. And then they're building a whole bunch of stuff around that. If you kind of check out, there's a thing called Bluemix, which is their sort of, I suppose, their platform as a service offering that they're building out. And they're ready to take on Amazon and the kind of dev test sort of area, you know, the developers wanting to build stuff or whatever, and at the same time going at enterprise kind of cloud on-ramp stuff, you know, bringing their enterprise customers onto the IBM cloud, and all of that requires them to have, you know, sort of enterprise class cloud technologies, including database.
Sure.
Now I can tell you that we, and again, this is between you and me, but we did a bake-off, a benchmark test between ourselves and DB2, running on SoftLayer, and on multiple dimensions, we were like 10 times faster. Running on single nodes. So when you start adding nodes, obviously we kind of keep scaling. So yeah, so for IBM, the questions are all about how do we compete with Amazon? How do we compete with Oracle? How do we not bring Oracle onto our own cloud? You know, etc.
Okay. Cool. What was that thing? Did you say Bluemix? That's not something I've...
Bluemix, yeah, M-I-X.
Bluemix. Okay, I'm sure something some of my colleagues would have heard of it. It's not something I've seen before.
Yeah,
okay,
you know,
cool.
Do you know what's funny about that, actually? Just to tell you, it's just a funny anecdote there. So I think Bluemix is kind of a cool name.
Yeah.
But IBM being IBM, they're going to rename it to be something like IBM Smart Cloud Application Services.
That is IBM being IBM, as you say, isn't
it? But it involves the pivotal stuff, you know, so
right.
Cloud Foundry and all that stuff. That's all coming together.
Okay. Yes. Right.
You know, with OpenStack and all that. That's what it is. So anyway, so the rest of the slide, basically, you know that we've been scaling the thing up to lots and lots of nodes. You know, we've run it at over 100 nodes, over 10 million transactions per second. We could spend, you know, all of our time scaling it out more. We really haven't found anything that's going to stop it from getting to 1,000 nodes or some very large number. But frankly, we're not seeing people needing that kind of level of performance right now. So, you know, we're going to keep moving that bar, but we don't see anyone else that's able to run on 100 machines, and we don't see any customers that are right now asking us for those kinds of levels of performance. But you know, I'm sure we're going to see that, and when we do, we'll keep moving that up. But it is interesting to see that, you know, that there isn't any architectural limitation that we're seeing that's going to cause that to, you know, to stop. We talked to you before about this HP Moonshot stuff, and you know, the key messages there are about, you know, HP had come to us with this, and they were launching Moonshot. They just, by the way, launched the next generation of Moonshot, but the spring release had these somewhat anemic processors in it. So Moonshot is this, you know, kind of rack mount tray in effect that takes server cartridges, and the initial one was like it had 45 Intel Atom-based servers plugged in, and they said, kind of show us a benchmark. We want to launch this thing. We want some kind of, you know, buzz. And we said, look, you know, we can run a single database across 45 servers, and that's going to go pretty fast and it'll be quite cool. But why don't we break a world record on the number of databases running on a $60,000 box? And that's what this is. So there's the 72,000 databases. In fact, 65,000 of them were what we call hibernated. So we have this database hibernation technology with patents applied for it, which basically shuts down everything on behalf of any given database. So there really, at any instant, there were really only 7,000 databases running on the machine, but 7,000 is still a big number. And it also had this kind of idea of database bursting, and so that databases that were really sort of getting overworked on those small machines could be bursted onto adjacent machines temporarily. So it's actually very cool stuff. And I think kind of demonstrated to HP that we're not just a kind of a turbocharger whacked onto old style technology. So anyway, that's interesting stuff. We did that this year, and then we've been gathering lots of customers. I'll talk about Fathom Voice a bit more in a minute. And then just to remind you that it's a SQL database, we were able to run Drupal and Jira and NoC and a whole bunch of other of these kind of standard applications. It's a fully featured SQL server, and so we're starting to see that. I think in 2014 you're going to see much more of that, because the promise is, if you think about Drupal, who wouldn't want to have their Drupal instance running out of multiple data centers or multiple Amazon regions with consistent data? And we kind of just do that for free. So it's pretty cool stuff, actually. Just scooting on to the next slide. Lots of customers, as I mentioned, and you'll see here a wide range of independent software vendors, mobile apps, voice over IP, some Fortune 500 stuff, and so on. Zombie obviously is a games company. Shout is quite interesting. That's a kind of an in-stadium mobile app for people to kind of vote on player of the game, or kind of win a Ducati motorbike or whatever they do. And that's a sort of a very high transaction rate application that runs through the course of a game. But just to pick out some others, Blackhawk is, if you think about prepaid cards in the US, these kind of prepaid cards are the biggest processor of prepaid cards is Blackhawk Network, and that's a NuoDB application. Dropship Commerce is a sort of a SaaS application for delivering for doing dropship e-commerce. So they arrange for direct shipment to your location from the source, manage all that stuff. Let me see. Platform 28 is a sort of a call center, very high transaction rate call center offering that runs on the cloud. So anyway, so lots of different stuff, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The next slide talks about the architecture. We've talked about that a lot before, so unless you want me to go through that again, I'm not going to talk about it.
That's fine. Yep.
These next three slides are really sort of the sort of key things that we talk about. This sort of scalability stuff continues to be a driver. A large proportion of the people that are sort of knocking on our door are doing so because of this, that they're looking for not just performance, but on-demand performance. The ability to scale up and scale down, and to do that, so simply. I was talking to actually a major company yesterday, that when you said to them, well, we can do this, they said, well, we can kind of sort of do this with Oracle, but let me tell you about all the stuff that we're using to do it. And then he gave me a list of about 10 different pieces of infrastructure and replication technology and whatever.
Sure.
And they're basically saying that these are guys that are running 22,000 databases. And they said, what I see here is simplicity. I see what you're doing is something which allows us to trivially get this kind of scale. So you've heard this story before, but it continues to be really exciting to people building next-gen applications. The continuous availability stuff on the next chart is really, kind of this combination of the system being resilient to failure, and which I think is in itself huge. But I think the piece that people really take seriously is this ability to also do arbitrary administration without taking the system down. So it's the idea of the system's running, kind of 7 by 24 for the next 10 years, And in the meantime, you can do rolling upgrades, you can change schemas, obviously, you can do all your backups, you can do whatever you want to do. You can upgrade machines, you can move the database if you really want to do that and never miss a beat. And this is actually quite hard for people to understand. You have to really talk to them to get them to understand what we're really saying here.
Sure.
But once they get it, they're like, wow. And again, back to exactly the conversation I was having yesterday, these guys were saying it's incredible that even in these days, you have to, as an IT organization, you have to plan 4 hours of downtime to upgrade Oracle. And we're saying, why are you doing that? It's a huge issue. We talked about this moonshot stuff, and so that's the next slide. And basically, I think the key here is not that we're saying that anybody wants to run 72,000 databases on a $60,000 bot, but this principle of being able to have lots of databases, essentially being assigned to very low-end hardware until such time as you need higher-end hardware, and in fact, even being able to switch them off if they're not busy for 30 seconds or something. And that this idea of this very, very sort of 0 to 100 machines kind of scalability is pretty extreme. But most people have got some kind of a challenge that looks a bit like that. So and we don't really like this word DBMS virtualization, by the way. So if you've got better ideas on how to talk about it, then we're listening. And then we talk about multi-Datacenter, which is basically the same thing as Geo-Distribution. So you understand that stuff. And again, I think what happens here is that people, again, when they realize that we really are saying consistent, this isn't master replication, this isn't sort of some kind of a sort of eventually consistent model or something like that, that you really are able to run in multiple places at the same time with the same data. Is pretty kind of mind-blowing story. So then just moving on, we've talked about the roadmap. We shipped the product in version 1 in January. We just shipped version 2 last week. Next year we'll be doing the version 3 stuff, and we've already got some of the work going for doing that. The main thing I'd want to say to you is, and I said this at the launch, not sure if you were able to attend it at all, but one of the things that is to understand is that version 1 was really sort of targeted at being what I call a better 20th century database system. So, it was a great solution that was better, faster, more scalable, etc., than a MySQL or a Postgres or a SQL Server or something. Version 2 really is the start of the big strides towards what we call the 21st century database system. And when you look at our architecture, there's such rich opportunity for us to build out capabilities that haven't really been seen in databases before. And so that's what version 2 is the start of. And when you get to version 3, you're going to start seeing some very exciting stuff. So the main thing here for you to take away is, we see ourselves as the innovators. We see ourselves as the guys that are kind of, sort of defining the next sort of the terms of the next battle, and because we own this entire code base, because we built it from the ground up, because we've got such control of it, and because it's such a radical architecture, we think we're just going to put more and more space between ourselves and anyone else. So then, just moving quickly onto the version 2 stuff, and so you tweeted about us having launched it. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Again, really sort of three things that we talk about in terms of version 2, and there are probably 100 others, but the three big ones are Geo-Distribution. We discovered in the course of the 9 months that the 1.x product was shipping that people really, really care about this, that these next generation applications, which are almost always web-facing or mobile or Internet of Things or something like that, they're all basically geo-distributed applications, and they all have a requirement for low latency, and they all have a requirement for continuous availability. And the way to do that is to run it out of multiple data centers or multiple Amazon regions or something. And so this became a big focus for us, and we spent a lot of time building out kind of performance optimization, as well as kind of failure management around Geo. And we're going to continue doing that. It just is, it's become really quite an interesting thing. Almost everyone we talk to gets excited about this stuff.
Sure.
And then,
that's kind of interesting as well, and that you know, the way you describe that in terms of the customer demand there, because I think, you know, there's obviously multiple reasons why, you know, customers look for geo-distribution. I think that one of the things we've seen mainly up to now has been actually about it's been performance, about having the data, you know, close to the you know, the end user in the, you know, in the, wherever they might happen to be.
right.
So it's quite interesting that you're talking there actually about more about low latency and high availability by having multiple zones. It's more about high availability than it is necessarily about that performance issue.
Well, you know, that's kind of what I'm implying in terms of by saying latency, that, you know, there's performance value of having, if you're in Tokyo, you're talking to a database server in Tokyo, and and so yeah, that's a performance issue, but in particular, it's a latency issue, right? That these applications, people are wanting to, you know, click on the link and get the next web page, or, you know, or whatever it is. They don't want to go across 3 WANs to get to California or whatever. So I think it is those two things. It's performance, but it's also this kind of ability for the system to keep running even when things go down. And particularly when I say that, I'm talking about, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but basically if you look at Amazon, which, you know, they've done a fantastic job of building out the infrastructures that they have, but they're still nowhere near kind of, you know, carrier grade uptime. And when they go down, and you suddenly get all these kind of headlines about, you know, Netflix or whoever losing all this money, you know, part of that is that they don't have a mechanism to fail over between these regions, and it's very hard to do. And you can do it; it's painful. And so from our perspective, part of this geo-distribution thing is this kind of, if you like, Amazon region redundancy. Okay. So just kind of the piece that's related to it is this thing called auto administration, and, you know, this is the idea that, you know, that it's all very nice to have these database servers running in all these different places. By the way, all of them are kind of volatile, you know, because the thing is so dynamic. Any given server could be part of the database or not part of the database at any given moment. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a database administrator or system administrator manually starting up database servers and bringing them down, or using REST interfaces or scripting or something. What makes a lot more sense, if you imagine you're trying to run, you know, say, you know, 10 servers in London and 8 servers in Tokyo and 6 servers in New York, rather than trying to manually fire those up and shut them down and so forth, which we do support, what's much better is to be able to just have a template that essentially sets policies. And so when you start up the database, you say, start up this database using this template. And that template says, I want this many machines in each location. It might say, if a machine goes away, please replace it. It might say, you know, if you get to such and such a utilization as measured by such and such a statistic, then add another machine. Or if the utilization drops below a certain point, then, you know, you can drop a machine. And so it's basically this idea of policy-based administration. We call it auto admin. I think we talked about it before. And we demoed it at the launch last week. And so, you know, Seth was able to just, you know, fire up a database with like 3 clicks on the auto admin console, and then change the configuration to different template, you know, on the fly. So, you know, you just go along and pick something else off of the list, and you know, it says now I want you to run in multiple data centers, and you know, the operator sits back, and, you know, a second or two later, it's running on multiple data centers. So it's this idea of hugely simplifying the kind of admin of it. and then for us to build this out over time. So our templates have a sort of a grammar, a language that allow you to specify this, and we'll be working with customers to get smarter and smarter about what they want to have, specifiable. It's almost, you can almost think about it as SLAs. What kind of service level kind of policies do you want to be putting into these templates, and how can we take that further? So we're pretty excited about it. It's sort of hard to describe, but when you see it in action, it's really, really impressive stuff.
Sure.
The third big thing that I talk about, there's lots of other things to talk about, but I think the thing that's really most interesting here is this idea of the server-side programming model, and in particular the Java stuff. And so, a lot of our customers are running Java JDBC client-side applications. We now allow you to take that. We've got a JVM embedded in the actual server process, and we've supplied a JDBC API, and so you can move client-side Java applications to run in process, with direct access to this in-memory data, and not only that, but to scale out. As you scale out more machines, you're scaling out not just the database processing, but you're scaling out the part of the application that's embedded in the database. Sure. Which is a big difference compared to traditional Java stored procedures or any stored procedures. In a sort of an Oracle style model or SQL Server or something, stored procedures are being added load for the system that is the bottleneck. The database server is this single machine that's basically already the bottleneck. Putting stored procedures in there has its problems. But for us, it's pretty cool. You've got this. It's almost a sort of a scalable app server directly connected to the data, and very exciting stuff. We've already had huge, very interesting conversations with some of our big customers about what they can do with this. So that's kind of a technical aspect to the product, but I think you're going to see gigantically improved performance. You're going to see people being able to move all sorts of rich processing down to that kind of level. And then there's a bunch of other enhancements, which I don't really want to spend too much time on right now, but we can if you like. Just talking about kind of additions and pricing, basically we continue to have the developer edition is a kind of a one-year subscription where you're not entitled to deploy anything, but you can do anything you want with the product. So it's an unlimited license, technically speaking, and you can build any system you like, and that's the developer edition. The Pro edition is the core of where we make our money, and this basically is a base license, and then incremental nodes, and of course a 2-host version of it is free forever. So that's the kind of freemium part of the system. We have an enterprise edition which we've introduced, and this is going to get richer and richer over time, and it's really targeted at these geo-distributed deployment scenarios. And so that's kind of at a different price point, but still not super expensive. It's still not kind of up there in the Oracle kind of range.
Yeah.
And then we do have a cloud edition, which you can go along to Amazon Marketplace and just kind of fire up nodes and just pay us by the hour, and we'll do that. And you're going to see us do more of that kind of stuff through 2014. So just to talk about Fathom Voice quickly. By the way, did you see the launch? Probably not.
No, I wasn't able to, unfortunately. So no.
That's okay. So I just didn't want to repeat stuff. So Fathom Voice is interesting. They're basically a voice over IP company that deliver just raw voice over IP services, and then a bunch of things on top of that. And they run on Amazon, and they were running on MySQL. They went to Amazon and they said, this doesn't work. We're trying to run in multiple Amazon regions, in Virginia, Singapore, Sydney, Australia, Dublin, and they said, how are we supposed to keep our data consistent? And Amazon said, well, you should be kind of kind of zipping stuff up and FTPing it between these different places.
Right.
And they said, well, wait a minute, that, surely that's not the right answer. They went and they looked at Oracle, they looked at SQL Server, they were running on MySQL, that wasn't working. They looked at various Amazon services, Dynamo, and so on. And eventually, Amazon said, let's introduce you to NuoDB. And they connected with us. In fact, in this case, Amazon actually paid us to make them successful. So what you've got is a system which is running in those different locations, which is connecting phone calls, which is doing call data records and billing and all that stuff, and they're absolutely thrilled. I mean, this is a system that is all of that complexity has gone away. We're handling kind of the distributed. They do things which are, the workload looks like a lot of distributed inserts, and they've got a need for consistency of that data. It's quite impressive to see how they're running. They'll show you a console of this thing running 5 different Amazon regions around the world, with a lot of activity going on and a single consistent database across the whole thing. Very exciting, and in fact, I think what we're seeing is that a lot of this kind of voice over IP and VoIP-based call center stuff and other telco things, very suited to what we're doing, and so we're probably going to see more customers in this kind of area. So Fathom Voice very excited, and they were basically a launch partner with us last week, talking about it.
Yeah. It's interesting as well because it kind of validates. I can't remember who I was speaking to recently off the top of my head, but I was talking about a company that wanted to do kind of multi-region, Amazon RDS, and just said Amazon just wasn't interested in that at all. So that obviously validates the fact that they were quite happily, brought that customer to you is obviously a great opportunity for you. But it kind of validates that as well, that it's not something that at this point, at least, that Amazon is interested in enabling or helping customers with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what we're saying here is that we know the guys in the database guys in Amazon, and the truth is that from their perspective, they've been putting a lot of their effort into the kind of RDS frameworks and the ability to run different databases in the context of RDS and so on. They've been doing some work at a core database level, but they're not kind of like ourselves focused on solving these core problems. And I think they're probably watching to see how big a deal this is. And we're quite happy with that. We're connected with them. I mean, we're connected with their field technical folks, the SE basically. And these guys are the ones that are calling us. They're saying, well, kind of seen what you've done with Fathom. Let me tell you, I've got these other 2, 3, 4 other accounts that have got versions of the same problem. And from Amazon's overall perspective, their public position, and I do believe it, is that they're not really trying to be a database vendor or anything else. Their goal is to get as many users onto AWS as possible. And so, they're as far as they're concerned, if we're, a way of getting more happy customers onto their overall infrastructure, then, more power to us.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I guess the only caveat to that might be I had an interesting conversation with a company recently that set up a data warehouse as a service on AWS, and they said they were having lots of conversations with kind of the field sales, and they were getting lots of leads through AWS field sales and saw lots of excitement. And then suddenly Amazon went and announced Redshift, and it seemed like the field salespeople genuinely didn't know that Redshift was coming down the pipe. So it's just an interesting insight into how Amazon works.
Yeah, and you're right about this. I mean, Amazon is kind of, they've got, sometimes when companies are kind of wildly successful, they can become quite arrogant, and Amazon's they're not an easy partner or a sort of folks that are kind of, you can really be clear about what exactly they're doing and why they're doing it or anything like that. I know that reputation of theirs. And basically, that's true. Having said that, not only do they bring us these accounts, and there's some others, but Fathom's the one we're talking about right now. But
Sure.
in the case of Fathom, they actually paid us money to do it.
Yeah.
Like,
Fair enough.
yeah, yeah. So that's kind of pretty much the overview. I think that you're probably aware that in terms of the company, what we're doing with this 2.0 launch is
Yeah.
we're targeting next year as a really big kind of ramp year for us, and so this is about getting your ducks in a row in terms of having a rock solid 2.0 product out there with clear targets in terms of kind of users and entry points into companies, you know, demonstrating a repeatable business model, which we now have, where we can, if you put more money into marketing, we'll get more leads, and those leads will turn into more deals, and that's basically, that's the dream, and that's basically what we planned for this year, and we've done it.
Yeah.
So the 2.0 launch is kind of a launch pad for our 2014 activities, and so you're going to see next year really is when we really start ramping the customers and ramping revenues.
And are you able to give some context on those targets, and happy for that to be completely off the record, or happy for you to say no, you don't want to talk about it, but just interested.
Yeah, it's not a single thing, okay?
Right.
But if you look at it, there are we've talked about, there are folks that are trying to run real-time kinds of systems like the VoIP vendors and those kinds of guys. That's low-hanging fruit for us. Nobody else can get at that. We're extremely good at it, so that's easy. Other low-hanging fruit is stuff that you would see a lot of the other kind of high-performance database guys going after. So when you look at games, ad tech, all that stuff, that's kind of straightforward. At the core of our programs continues to be essentially what we call MySQL pain. So people that are building web-facing applications that have got performance problems or sort of continuous availability problems. And so there's this whole kind of theme around MySQL scalability. You're seeing activity around independent software vendors. So basically, there's some folks that we haven't announced yet that are really big relationships that you'll be interested in, and that's where again these folks have got applications that run on Oracle, SQL Server, whatever, and they're wanting to go to the cloud. They're wanting to deliver SaaS applications. They're wanting to have less dependency on those old-style vendors. They need a fully fledged general-purpose SQL database that's cloud-ready, and there's only one of those. So, that's opportunity for OEM types of transactions. We're doing a lot of that.
Sure.
And then you're seeing the last category is really sort of quite a lot of enterprise opportunities in financial services and telecoms in particular.
Sure. Okay. Cool.
So it's really interesting to see to see how I mentioned this to you before, when we went to market in the first place, the core of the model is this very planned and organized kind of download model. I mean, we have some of the best kind of marketing automation systems and kind of Salesforce automation systems in place, and we've had them in place for a year. And it's all downloads and translating those and lead scoring and all that stuff. And it's been really successful. I mean, we're closing transactions which are in the $30,000 to $100,000 of average contract value. So kind of repeatable deals of that kind of range. But we're also seeing, and this is where you start seeing the surprising stuff, we're seeing stuff which is more in the range of $1 million a year. and that I think is that I'm not going to say a complete surprise, but I think it's this strategic aspect of the product, which is that for a lot of people they see it as really a modern Oracle, and that puts you into a completely different kind of price point.
Sure, absolutely. Sorry, the line cracked up a little bit. What would you say was the more typical kind of range?
Sort of the download model drives at around $30,000 to $100,000 a year, something like that, and which is, by the way, good numbers.
Yeah.
But you're seeing stuff in the kind of $1 million a year stuff in this sort of range, and I think when you're looking at how this company becomes really the sort of dominant next generation player, you don't need a lot of those big ones, to kind of to get your head well above the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Especially if they're prepared to talk publicly about them as well, and act as the reference for some of the smaller deals. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think that pretty much covers obviously what I was looking for. So yeah, that was perfect in terms of just getting caught up on the 2.0 and the strategy around that. So that's great. The only other thing that I think we'd like to track is the headcount of the company. Have you got an update on that?
Yeah, we're keeping it pretty level. It's we've been in this kind of mid-30s range. I think we might be 40 or just short of 40, something like that.
Okay.
Count.
Yeah. Fine. Cool. Great. Well, yeah, thanks very much for your time. And yeah, look forward to hearing more, obviously, into 2014 as things ramp up.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Yeah, bye-bye.